Today we're looking at what's called the shutdown decision. Of course, we assume that all businesses want to make money, and that would be nice if all businesses could always profit. But the reality is that that's not true for many businesses, especially in a short period of time. This is specifically a short-run idea for economics. You're not going to shut down permanently. That's called going out of business. We'll talk about that later. This is a temporary decision where you're not going to produce for a given amount of time. So an example of this, I'm from a ski town back in California, and we call it the shoulder season. So in between the summer, when there's all sorts of campers and fishermen and all of that, and between the winter, when the mountain reopens for business, you have this time where there's not a lot of customers in town. So restaurants, nice restaurants, will often shut down during that time because their employees have been working hard and they want a break. They want to go play in the beautiful outdoors. But more pragmatically, there's also a desire to minimize losses during that time. Paying all those people to work when there aren't really any customers is probably not a very good decision. That's a little different than what we're going to talk about here, because that's something that occurs regularly every year. This is more, maybe a once-off event or something you might do every now and then, but not so regular like the example I just gave. Okay, so what we have to look at is we have to assume that in this case, total costs are going to be greater than total revenue. That is, the business is going to be losing money. Get it out of your mind that some option for this business is to profit. We've got to assume that there's no way they can profit in the short run. So they would have three options. They could go out of business, but that's actually not an option in the short run. Well, why is that true? Remember, in the short run, it's the short run because you have some amount of fixed cost, which are costs that typically have a contract, linked to them. So you can't go out of business and just not pay off your contracts. So because you have to stay in business for a year or two while a lease contract runs its course, or maybe you've hired somebody on salary for a year or two, during that time period, you don't have the option of just going out of business. At the end of that time period, you could not renew your lease, you could not rehire someone who had a contract, but until that time, you're forced to stay in business, but you're not going to make money. So now you have only two choices. You can continue to operate business as usual, knowing that you're going to lose money, and again, get it out of your mind that there's some way that you might be profitable. Or you can shut down like we're talking about here. So when you shut down, we have to look at these three things. If I stop producing, close the door, it looks like I've gone out of business. If I stop producing, my revenue is going to go to zero. But the other thing that's going to go to zero is going to be my variable costs. However, my fixed costs will remain. They're not linked to production. And that's really the key. These two are linked to production, and this one is not. So let's take a look at the diagram. So what we have here, again, we show a business that's making a loss. We can tell that because at QPM, AR is less than ATC. Notice again, I'm writing it ATC because we also have ABC on this diagram. So we know that it's losing money. We need to make another observation though. What we really need to see is what are the variable costs when they produce. So in this case, we go from QPM up to the ABC curve and across, and there's the amount of average variable costs when they're producing at QPM. Well, keep in mind the distance between those two, that's what we're pointing at there, the distance between those two is the average fixed cost. So the question becomes mathematically this right here. When I stay open, when I produce, let's say that revenue here, average revenue is going to be 100, okay? I get 100 by producing, and I have to spend 80 to produce. Okay, so 100 is greater than 80 here. Note, this is not to scale, it's just representative. So the revenue pays for all of the variable costs, so average revenue is greater than average variable costs, which means that there's some money left over, in this case $20, so 100 minus 80 is 20, and some of that money can pay off some of the fixed costs. So we apply that 20 to the fixed cost of minus 50, and we lose only $30. So what we can see is that the revenue, which is the green and yellow boxes added together, is paying for all of the variable costs, which are seen in green. The yellow then is the portion of the fixed costs that the revenue is also paying. So the costs in yellow and green are being covered by the revenue. Note though that it's not paying, the revenue isn't paying for all of the fixed costs, it's only paying for a portion of the fixed costs. So that in red is the portion of the fixed costs which are not being covered by revenue. That is, it would be this $30 right here. Well, what happens if we shut down? Remember, if we shut down, revenue goes to zero. So the green and the yellow box is no longer revenue, revenue is now zero. But variable costs go away as well. So we have 0 minus 0, so we have $0, obviously. And then I've got to use that $0 to pay my fixed cost. So obviously that's going to be a loss of negative 50. So again, on the diagram, what we would see is that we no longer have the yellow and the green as revenue, but instead we just have the red and the yellow as fixed costs, this distance here, and that entire area of red and yellow is going to be our area of loss. So in this case, the correct decision is not to shut down. Instead, they want to operate at a loss. Okay, because we're really creative in economics, this is going to be just the opposite. So here what we're going to see is that the amount of revenue that we make, which is here, is going to pay for, it's not going to pay for all of the variable costs. So what we can see is that this revenue, since it's not paying for all of the variable costs, revenue is 70, and variable costs are 80, so producing makes you lose $10 because the revenue that you get from producing is not as much as the variable costs you incur from producing. So then on top of the $10 you're losing by producing, you also lose an additional 60 for fixed costs. So in this case, the loss would be this entire top rectangle. If we shut down, however, total revenue is going to go to zero, we know that. Total variable costs are going to go to zero, we know that. So at this point, now the only thing that we're going to lose is the total fixed cost, which is just this top area here. So by shutting down, we lose only the yellow box instead of the yellow plus red box there. So in this case, and again, we can see on the diagram that average revenue never gets above average variable cost. So visually we can see that again here, the proper thing to do is to shut down. Now remember, this is only a short run decision. We're not going to do this permanently. So the question then becomes, what do we do in the long run? Well, remember, the long run is like tomorrow. It never gets here. You can plan, that's what the long run is. It's the planning period. And you're looking ahead going, okay, these fixed costs are the problem. So I've got to change my costs. Maybe I also change my variable costs. Maybe I renegotiate rent contracts. Maybe I renegotiate a contract I have with a supplier of a service. And if I can lower those costs, or if I can change the revenue, if I can increase my revenue, then I can become profitable. Remember, one question we always have to ask with changing revenue is, can I just change the price to change revenue? Well, remember, we don't know that without knowing about PED. And in this case, since we're talking about a perfectly horizontal demand curve for the firm, PED, of course, is perfectly elastic, so that's not going to work. The other option that you have is you can decide, you know what, this just isn't going to work. So at this point, you can go out of business because you don't have any contracts left. A couple other things to keep in mind. You might not want to shut down, even though it's technically the right choice to make in terms of profit maximization. You might want to stay there just to keep your name out there, just so people are aware of you, right? That could be valuable. It could be valuable over time. You also might be thinking about the impact on people who are associated with the business, people who work for you. Yeah, it might cost you, you might lose a little bit more money by staying open, but maybe you're able to employ people and it's worth it to you to hold on to good employees from a business sense. Maybe it's just also a humanitarian thing. You just don't feel right laying all those people off. But again, keep in mind that you can do that all you want, but eventually if you go out of business, those same things are going to occur. So if we're assuming profit maximization, then neither of those two things are going to be a factor. However, as we'll discover later, profit maximization is not the only goal that firms will pursue. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below.